All righty. So I'm going to start with the quantitative methods. And as you can see, the beautiful, uh, different colored string that really coalesces into a great idea. So we're going to take all of those pieces of the methodology and wrap those together uh, into an idea. So when I think about the quantitative methodology, I think about it like a cookbook. So why do I think about it like a cookbook? Well, a cookbook has the ingredients, has how you mix them together, how long you bake it for, and importantly, a cookbook offers the opportunity to have the same exact pie made every single time. So it's replicable. That's really, really important in research. That, in fact, if it's not replicable, okay, then that's really not great science, right? If I can find differences or relationships, but nobody else can, so it really has to be replicable, the findings, but the methodology is the key part to that of how that recipe is put together. So these are the basic bones of it, which is you have to have research questions or DMPs, study aims, that's fine. Some driving thing that we're seeking to examine. All right. So with that, with quant, certainly we want participants, obviously. You can use secondary data, even better, makes IRB much more smooth. But most people are going out getting original data, and you need participants. I'll jump to over here, which is the sample size, how many participants. We'll get there in a minute. By the way, it's not by accident that it's after the data analysis plan. The sample size, just to touch on it for a moment, is based on the data analysis plan. So I'll get there. So we want participants really that are participants of interest. Okay. You also need survey instruments. Makes sense. You do not want to make up your own survey instrument. That's really important too. I just had a client, they made up their own instrument, and what happens is they wind up off track. They want to say, there's emotional intelligence different by gender. They want to make up their own instrument. Then they said, how do you know your instrument is reliable? How do you know your instrument is valid? And they get a whole off track. So I would say as doc students, or even probably most people in the world, do not try to make your own instrument at this level, for sure. There's a lot of reliable, valid instruments that are out there that you can use. And you can freely use them, or you can, call Mind Garden, and they'll sell you some X amount of versions of it, or X amount of it. So instruments. I was going to say something else about that. So yeah, use reliable, valid instruments. What if there are no instruments that measure what you want to measure? Possible, okay? And you're a doc student seeking to get out this decade, okay? Do you think it's a good idea to start to research something that no one else has researched on the planet globally? No, I'm going to say change your topic, okay? That's not going to make sense to my brain that I'm seeking to go through this exercise called a dissertation, or even if you're a faculty member, we can have that conversation that you're developing instruments. That's a slightly different animal. Most people are conducting studies. They're seeking to examine the research questions that we laid out up front. So I'm going to dissuade you if I talk to you, but I'm talking to you now. I'm going to dissuade you from, as a doc student or a master's student, and even other faculty who want to get published, use existing instruments. There's a clue that no one has created that instrument. That's a clue. That's a red flag. That's a problem. So don't do that to yourself. All right. The procedure is obviously how do I administer those reliable and valid survey instruments to those participants that I have interest in examining. All right. That's a very cookbooky part. Okay. You have to lay out step by step how you're going to administer that. I am going to the chair department who's going to send it to all of these nursing students. And they're going to request that they fill out the survey. I'm going to tell them how long the survey is. And I'm going to tell them what's expected of them. And I'm going to thank them. So you have to lay out that procedure. When you go through this process, your next door neighbor who knows nothing, they cut lawns for a living, okay, can do your study. Okay, they have to be able to do that. If it's so obscure that they cannot follow your instructions, that could be not does not speak to replicability. They have to be able to follow that like a cookbook, step by step by step. All right. So really important. And by the way, make it simple for people. Don't make it complicated. Don't try to be smart. There are some smart methodologies, okay, some sophisticated ones, but most people are just doing basic things, okay? Let's just go with that use case, all right? So simple, I'm going to get these participants in this way, or these participants are of interest. Here are my reliable, valid instruments. Here's the procedure I'm going to use to get them. I should say too, though, that if you didn't know, SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics, they have participant banks. Getting data is challenging. If you can use secondary data, as I mentioned, use that. But they also have survey banks that you can kind of get whoever you want pretty quickly for a price, maybe $5 a piece, $20 a piece. We'll get to sample size, but just know that you can get data. I mean, short of getting, dead presidents, most typical people they can get. I mean, they have literally millions and millions of people in their banks that can help you get that data. So just know that that's an option. Okay. Data plan and sample size. I've been consulting for 30 years. The biggest problem students come to me with, and some faculty, okay, are data plans. What darn statistics do I use to examine those research questions, given the data from those instruments? That's an important question. You have to get that right. And I'm going to step into that and lean into that here, because that's where people struggle. All right. All right. Next is the sample size determination. So there's kind of two sample sizes in the world. One is what they do for polling. I have 300 million Americans. How many people do I have to sample? Okay, stratified sample, different kinds of sampling methods to assess kind of where the country's temperature is regarding a particular candidate, for example. That is not what we're doing here. We are not doing that, okay? We're not looking to generalize to the whole world, okay? We've basically taken a convenient sample of the people that we can get our hands on, okay? All right, convenient sample that have the characteristics that I'm interested in, or supposed characteristics. All right, the other sample size is called a power analysis. That is to help determine the sample size. That power analysis is very simple. I used to struggle with it myself for a long time, but we've made it very simple, and I'll show that power analysis. But basically, the sample size is based on your data analysis plan. If you're doing a correlation, this is your sample size. If you're doing ANOVA, this is your sample size. If you're doing a regression with this many predictors, this is your sample size. So it's intimately tied to your data plan. What if I have a correlation on one hand and I'm doing an ANOVA on another? Which sample size do I use? You use the most stringent one. If one requires 30, the other requires 50, guess what? your desired sample size is 50. And I use that language very specifically. Desired sample size, okay? Not mandated sample size. Desired sample size. Why do I want to couch it as desired? Because if you say, I must have 50 people, and you get 49 people, guess what? You're going to have some faculty member, you're going to have some faculty member come and say, go collect more data, okay? So just know, be kind of general about it. And so the take home message is the sample size is related to the data plan. These are the bones of a quantitative methodology. You can have ethical, parts of it. You can talk about, confidentiality or anonymous, how you're doing it. So there's other things about it, but to me, these are the bones. And when you have those bones, you know you have a study brewing. Okay. Some people start with a methodology. Typically, what do you hear? You hear, well, I have to search the literature. I have to look for the gaps. Most people have an idea of what they want to do. All right. And you probably have an idea of what you want to do. So you can start with a methodology or sketch that out to know that you have a study that's doable. I have these questions. I have these participants, don't have instruments. Gotta stop. I have these questions. I have these instruments. I can't get hold of the participants. So knowing that you have these components in, I'll call them big rocks, is really important. All right. Let's lean into the data analysis plan, the place where people struggle the most. People struggle with research questions too. Don't go crazy, okay? Most people articulate them the best you can. And I'll talk a little bit about research questions and data plans together, but keep it simple. People say they want to keep it simple, and then they have all of this extra stuff. So let's talk about data plans. Data plan really consists of two broad things. One is research questions stated in statistical language. I'll talk about what is statistical language. Talk about that. But know that you need that piece of it. You can't just say, I can't even think of a non-statistical way of putting things in. Because my brain now is embedded in statistical language. So I'll relay what that is. So it has to be statistical language is that it foreshadows the analysis that's coming. And I'll talk about that in a second. Research questions in statistical language, part one. The other one is you have to know the levels of measurement of your variables. And I'll talk about that. All right. So let's just get into that. But just know the data plans take those two pieces, research questions, levels of measurement. So what are research questions in statistical language? Well, here's the most common, okay? Does A relate to B, okay? Does A correlate with B, okay? These are very common, all right? Last night, someone was looking at, anxiety, attachment, and satisfaction scores. Okay. Do these things relate to each other? Are they correlated with each other? That's a very common type of question. The other question is, are there differences on some variable A by B? Okay. This is, again, I'm, working last night with a gentleman, are there differences on satisfaction by attachment style? Secure, insecure, anxious, avoidant, okay? So are there differences? And there's lots of ways, and we want to know about those differences, right? Are there differences on some variable, some measured variable, by what you're selecting, gender or attachment style or whatever? So very, very, very common. The third common way is A predicted by B, or does B predict A, okay? Does B impact A? Is the variability in A accounted for by B? So there's several ways of saying it, but at the end of the day, we're either relating two variables, we want to see if there's differences in some variable by some other variable, or is there some predictive value to be had here? That's statistical language, okay? Relating differences, impacted, predicted, and so forth. That's good language. You can use, by the way, you can use these LLMs are pretty good. You can use the chats and so forth to help to help get there. So I had a gentleman yesterday who did use that. It wasn't perfect because they kind of threw the kitchen sink at him, but nevertheless, he had some ideas brewing about kinds of tests. All right. What's going to be really, really critical to the type of test, though, is the levels of measurement of the variables. Absolutely critical. So, what are the levels of measurement of A's or B's? Okay. Make a huge difference in driving the test. Let's talk about A's and B's. Basically, there's three buckets of A's and B's. Variables could be nominal, which is Latin for name only, male, female, Republican, Democrat, green. The party still exists, I don't even know. Okay, basically they're just labels. Okay, there's no order to them. There's no, okay, they're just labels of anything. Pencil, pen, writing instruments, okay, whatever. All right, just labels. Nominal, name only. And only some tests allow that. Okay? Ordinal is a label plus an order. Ah, I have a label. This is small, this is medium, this is extra large. Okay. So I have labels for these levels and they're in some order. But the interval, the distance or the interval does not have to be equal. So I can have a small Coca-Cola at 8 ounces, a regular Coca-Cola at 12 ounces, or a medium Coca-Cola, and then I can have extra large at 32. So obviously they're labeled and obviously they're in order, but they're not equal distances per se. The third level is continuous level variables, sometimes labeled as scale or ratio or interval. So there's a few different names for them, but basically at the end of the day, they're numbers, and those numbers have labels, okay? 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees. Okay, they have labels, those numbers. They have an order. 3 doesn't go in between 1 and 2. Okay, they've ordered. Okay, and equal spaces. Okay, the space between, or the distance between 1 mile and 2 miles is the same distance between 2 miles and 3 miles, same as between 3 miles and 4 miles. So those are the levels. So you're going from very general, kind of nominal, to very specific, right? So you're losing information as you take a scale variable and you chop it in half. You say, this is low and high, ordinal. You're losing a lot of information in there and so forth. So for those, and I apologize for boring anybody who knows all of that and said, Jim, please move along here. I'm moving along. But you have to know those levels of measurement to get to the right test. Okay, let's now put some stuff together. So we're putting together the statistical language and we're putting together levels of measurement. This is not exhaustive, but it's enough to get us to where we need to go for a majority of people. And just to, it does not get us to fancy analysis. It goes beyond descriptive analysis. It can be means and standard deviations or frequency and percentages. Okay, so, but for those 3 classes of statistical language and for the levels of measurement, here we go. Does A relate to B? Well, if A is nominal and B is nominal, we're in chi-square land, okay? Now, and this could be nominal levels of 2, could have levels of 4, okay? Different 4 attachment styles by gender, okay, 4 by 2. So whatever it is, chi-square and zeta for ordinal. Okay, you can still, high or low or some darn thing. Chi-square land, all right? Now, when you have ordinal and ordinal, and does ordinal relate to ordinal? Does ordinal A relate to ordinal B? Does ordinal A relate to scale B? We're in Spearman correlation land. Okay? Right. And scale to scale, does this age group of one partner correlate to this age group of the other partner? Pearson correlations. Okay? So when we're in the relating to, okay, land, chi-squares and correlations can get us there. Okay. Differences on A by B. Okay. So the number of levels of B, okay, I could have male, female, I can have political affiliation, Republican, Democrat, Green, or independent, or whatever. Okay, so the number of levels of that B, or the independent variable, matters. So if you have a scale variable, looking at differences in a scale variable by a nominal level variable with two levels, I'm in t-test land. Okay? If I'm looking at a scale variable by a nominal level variable, just labels, with three or more, I'm in ANOVA land. Okay? If I am looking at a scale variable by ordinal, I can do the, I'm assuming these are, I'm going to treat those almost as nominal, could be low, medium, high. I can, and I'm looking for differences. I can still be in t-test land and ANOVA land. Okay. And ordinal by nominal, I'm really kind of in Mann-Whitney land and Kruskal-Wallis land. These are non-parametric tests, just a fancy way of saying that they don't have assumptions, okay? All right, and then I've included here not only for, these are for pairing, for paired, ordinal by, pre-test, post-test follow-up, the same person over time. We could talk about that, but just to know you're kind of in basically, and these two are the very common ones, particularly this first one. You're really in t-test land, paired t-test or independent t-test, and ANOVA could be one-way ANOVA, it could be repeated measures ANOVA, but you're in ANOVA land. Okay. All right, the third thing is the predicted by. We're in regression land here. All right. So regression land is, basically, does B predict? Okay. Well, so the A is what really matters. That outcome variable, the criterion variable, okay, the dependent variable, a lot of names for A, but nevertheless, it's the outcome variable. And based on that level of measurement, that's what drives what analysis it is. So I'm going to lay out 4 ways of having that outcome variable. It could be a binary outcome variable, male, female. I want to see if age predicts political affiliation, Republican, Democrat. Okay. I want to see if region of the country, whatever. Okay. It doesn't matter what the predictors are. The outcome variable is binary. 2 options. Okay. We're in binary logistic regression land. Okay. Now, that nominal variable could have many levels, 2 or more, or let's say 3 or more, okay? We're in multinomial regression land. If it's an ordinal outcome variable, we're in ordinal regression land. And what's most common is a scale outcome variable, right? Remember what scale is, all right? The scale outcome variables, and we're in linear regression. There's one predictor, multiple linear regression if I have several predictors, but we're in linear regression land. All right, before I go there, so I want to just recap. So data, how are we doing on time? Okay, so data plans require research questions in statistical language and knowing levels of measurement. And Melissa, everyone will get the slide deck, I hope, hopefully.
Everyone will get the recording of this.
I got it. Okay. And then statistical language is typically relating one to another, looking at differences on one by another, or predicting one from another. 3 levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, continuous. And then some of how we're tying together both the statistical language and levels of measurement to derive chi-squares, correlations, t-tests ANOVAs, or regressions. So that's okay, so now let's just open up to some questions here. So before we move to qualitative. All right, and what do we have here? So what's the difference between correlation and association? Great question. Again, there's many ways to phrase that. So is A related to B? Is A associated with B? Is A correlated with B? All the same thing, interchangeable. Yes. So that's true. Okay. I'm analyzing the mean of a Likert scale item between 3 subgroups, ANOVA, or rather than a simple t-test. Well, you have 3 subgroups. Okay. That's 2. That's 3. You can't use a t-test with 3 subgroups, right? You're in an overland. You bring up a question though, which is, is a Likert type scale really ordinal, okay? Or is it continuous? That is, going from strongly disagree to disagree, and disagree to neutral, and neutral to agree, and agree to strongly agree, is that the same intervals? The basic rule of thumb is if the Likert type scale has 5 or more levels, 5, typically 5 and 7 is common, you can treat it as a continuous variable without any harm to the analysis. So so you're in an overland and you can use it as a scale variable. What were the 2 places to get data and participants? Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey both have participant banks. Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey. They could be pricey, I mean, but just to know that that's available, as well as other, I should probably come up with some other different kinds of groups that you can get it from. But okay. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions at the moment? I think we're okay. Either you're shy or or I spoke too quickly, or you're just contemplating. All right. But nevertheless, I will continue on here. So let's go to qualitative methods. And then I'll look at tools. Let me do qualitative methods, and then I'll touch on the tools if I have some time, which I think I will. All right. So a few of the bones, I'll say, that should go in there. Obviously, the research questions should drive those semi-structured interviews. This seems like a much more creative process to me. I mean, if there's a protocol of interview questions that you can tweak, great. But typically, you know, my experience is that you can really develop those questions, maybe get them vetted by some experts. Hey, does that question kind of get at what I'm trying to get at? So I think there's much more flexibility going on here. Participants obviously should have some experience in the topic of interest, right? If I'm interested in parents, teachers, and administrators, I'm going to need parents, teachers, and administrators, okay? Semi-structured interviews are very typical of instruments. You should Zoom record them. You should have Zoom transcribe it for you. I believe it's free. And then you want to vet those transcriptions. Okay. Sample size determination. You know, I got to comment on this, but I mean, what people will say is, hey, you know what? Have as many participants as it is, so no new themes are emerging and so forth. I honestly don't think that's realistic. I mean, I'll probably get beat up for this, but you know, as doc students, and I'm assuming I'm speaking to a lot of doc students, but even to other researchers that are not funded, you know, there's practical considerations here. I just cannot get, I mean, a sample size of 25 for 1 hour. I mean, these things may not be possible. So, I mean, I think do the best you can. More is better. But I think it's only so many hours in a day. And people don't have access to lots of people. There should be, when you're dealing with folks around, personal narrative things or their own experiences, I think this kind of ethical considerations should really be considered, making sure, you need consent, things confidential or anonymous, how's my data held and so forth, you know. So those are kind of important things. Okay. Practical considerations about taking your interview, say, okay, and putting it into a tool. I'll demonstrate a tool that, can really help excerpt, code, and thematize in minutes, okay? Very quick. But it takes forethought, think about how am I putting that data in, okay? It makes a big difference. So the very typical way is that I have 7 interviewees, and I interview them, and I have that transcript, and I put them into 7 different interviews. And you can do that. In one of those interviews, I have from the first semi-structured interview question to the last semi-structured interview question. So that's all there. Fine. But there's other ways you could do it. So by research question or interview section, maybe your survey is asking about academic experience or school environment or communication and engagement and so forth. And maybe some of the surveys are broken up into those sections. You may want to create several data sets. So I would have 7 data sets of just folks' responses around an academic experience and make that a project. Okay. Then I have school environment. Okay. Maybe the second, fourth of this interview deals with school environment. And I have 7 of those. Keep them separate so I know who said what. But so just to know that that's going to really make sure there's no bleeding over of other questions. Okay. Or domain. So I have teachers and I have administrators and I have parents. I may want to keep those separate. All right. And then have a project for each one of these things. I had a gentleman and he was doing some military thing, and he had some interviews about land and some interviews about the sea. So, so there's lots of ways of splitting these things up. All right. So just know that. All right. All right. Other practical considerations. When I speak to students mostly, but even faculty, all right, they're like, how many themes are reasonable? Okay, so the rule of thumb is quality and depth over quantity. Okay, so that's good. All right, over prioritizing quantity. But as I said with the sample size for the sample size for the qualitative interviews, I think that there's a reasonable and rational number of themes that could be had. If you have, I mean, some people, they have, 200 codes. That doesn't make any sense to me. Unless you have a nice taxonomy to slot those things into, I don't know how I'm going to hold them in my head. And more importantly, how your reader is going to hold them in the head. I mean, there's a reason that, Kubler-Ross has got 5 categories of grief. Covey's got 7 habits of highly effective people. There's not 35 habits of highly effective people. There's not 28 stages of grief. So these are things that people can remember. And I think there's a lot of value in that. All right. So again, there's a practicality to these things that I think are important. Now, whether your committee agrees to that, whether reviewers agree to that of your articles, we'll find out. But these are I'm just giving you the best shot of what I've seen, what makes sense. And by the way, what gets published and what gets through committees. So All right, and I think I just want to just quickly jump into what these things look like in action, okay? So this is our qualitative tool. Intellect is qualitative. I'm just going to grab transcripts. All right, here are my transcripts over here, just to share with you the power of AI on these things. AI tools, the inductive coding literally identifies important excerpts, puts them together, and then generates a suggested code name and code description. Okay. You can do manual coding and for sure, read and reread, absolutely, because you don't know if these codes make sense. So, but know that there's AI tools out there that are able to very quickly, came up with 23 codes and 61 excerpts. And in very short order, I have all of these codes, okay, that I can go and look at the code name and description and excerpts. I can also very quickly thematize these. That is, how are those codes bucketed together? So the tool can actually discern what is the appropriate number of themes, in this case 10, okay, and then apply those to the project, and it now creates a theme that captures these codes, suggested theme name, theme description, the codes, and those excerpts very quickly. And you can see that, and you can see, I'll say the codes, you can see the different interviews and how many people participated in these things and so forth. These mock examples aren't, very elaborate, obviously, but they can get pretty intense. Let's see if I can grab one real quick. So just to give you an idea of what these things could look like, all of these interviews, a beautiful theme that has lots of contribution from all of these folks with several excerpts each. Lovely. You can look at the codes again. You can see the contribution of folks with the number of excerpts in there. So just to know, great tools that you can use to kind of start implementing. How many themes do I use? How do I divide up my interviews? Here they did it by interviewee. The other quick thing is to just share that when you have quantitative data, I'll just grab something here. Pick a. I'll just pick any one of these. Okay. So just to know, once you have data in, simple. Okay, here's a scale variable. Here's a nominal dichotomous variable. What's the differences on time by gender? You can just go, so really just start implementing this. Go to t-tests, independent sample, select on time by gender. By the way, it only lets you look at a dichotomous variable for a t-test. Oh, I have to select it. And you can see, once you have that data plan, then I'm doing an independent sample t-test. Here, this tool spits out the assumptions in English with an interpretation, assumption with interpretation, the results, APA tables, figures. We're kind of halfway there. So getting that data plan right is important. All right. So I think with that being said, that quick overview of intellect is statistics and intellect is qualitative, you have a flavor of hopefully some of those considerations before you get data. And then once you're there, I think you're, really more than halfway home. Okay, so let me start from the bottom. Will we send the recordings? Yes. Recordings made after the workshop, yes. Will we get the recording? Yes. All right. So I hear you guys want to get a recording. And I think, Melissa, this is worth transcribing, that maybe the people wanted to transcribe too. Okay. Mixed methods. So interesting question. So I would dissuade mixed methods, number one. Why? For dissertations or master's theses, I dissuade it because you have to now talk about two approaches. Pick an approach. Pick an approach. And go with it. Now, someone said, well, my instructor made me do the mixed method. Okay, that's a different animal. So I would say at the moment, you go through the two methodologies, go through the two sets of analyses, and then I would put it into ChatGPT. We're not quite there yet to triangulate them with our tools. I'd like to get there, but only so many hours in a day. But I do think that that's valuable, and people do that. What's most common is a quantitative survey with some open-ended responses. Okay, that's what I most frequently see. By the way, when you have open-ended, let me just open this up. When you do have a survey, mixed method survey with an open-ended response, you can use qualitative, but I think most of the time you can just kind of get to a quick, dirty, hey, what are the buckets? People asked about transformational leadership. We do have a text classification tool that built into the quant where you can kind of take these open-ended questions and have them bucketed into, in this particular case, a few buckets of servant leadership, strategic thinking, and transformational leadership. So that's also available. So, and I think that would satisfy the day unless it's truly mixed method. Okay. Do I have other questions here?
Just in the Q&A.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Q&A. Okay. What is too small for a sample size? Freud had sample sizes of 1, but I think that's too darn small. But let's get to that quant piece. So as I said earlier, that the sample size is based on the test. So if we took a test like a paired sample t-test, medium effect size 34. Okay, minimal 15. That would be too small. A regression, linear regression with a few predictors, 77, minimal 36. So it's really going to be based on the statistical test that you're using, the number of predictors and things of that sort, and then the effect size. One quick thought about that is there's if I'm looking for differences in emotional intelligence by gender, and it's really easy to detect differences, okay? That has a large effect size. I need a fewer amount of people to detect that. If they're really, really tiny differences, small effects, I need really large samples to detect that. So again, there's kind of a theoretical aspect to this. What have other studies found around emotional intelligence by gender? What was those effect sizes? That's one way to kind of get it theoretically. But then there's also this practical piece, which is there's no way in God's earth I'm going to get 550 people. So that's a conversation with you, committees, and so forth. All right. Final questions and thoughts. Let me go back to the PowerPoint for, if I can. I hope this was informative from the current slide. I hope that this was informative. If you want to talk more, there are free consultations. You can scan that QR code, or reach out to Samantha for student support, Ashley for faculty support, Melissa for general questions. And everyone can use the QR code for that free consultation if you'd like. The tools, by the way, Intellectus Statistics and Intellectus Qualitative offer free 7-day trials. So, so know that that's there. Statistics Solutions is just a wealth of, tons of pages about all different kinds of tests. So there's some free tools and free resources there, is one piece of it. We also offer workshops every Tuesday at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. I believe it's 1 o'clock.
Yep.
And that's it. So with that, I appreciate everyone showing up. My ask is, if you found it useful, share it with others. Tell others. People are struggling with methodologies, both quant and qual. They don't have to. Hopefully this workshop and this webinar kind of helped a little bit. And with that, I will say thank you for your attention, and have a great rest of the week.